Судя по заявлениям Дмитрия Сергеевича Пескова, у вас разговор должен до 18 часов состояться с Дональдом Трампом. Не знаю, насколько он...
That was Russian President Vladimir Putin, seen smiling and laughing off his apparent tardiness to the much-anticipated phone call with President Trump that was scheduled on Tuesday. Two leaders were supposed to talk about the ceasefire that Washington and Kiev proposed.
The pair finally spoke. In a lengthy call, Putin delivered a blow, stopping short of a 30-day ceasefire. He did, however, agree to pausing strikes against the Ukrainian energy infrastructure. Shortly after the call, air raid sirens sounded off in Kyiv, followed by explosions. Joining us now to discuss what's next is retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis and host of the Deep Dive with Daniel Davis on YouTube. Welcome, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me back. Glad to be here.
Yeah, great to have you with us. What do you make of the latest developments in the attempts to negotiate a peace between Russia and Ukraine? I know some people in the mainstream media probably took, Putin laughing off his need to get to a phone call with Trump as a sign that he's not ready to take the peace process seriously. What do you make of it?
Yeah, Robbie, I've been looking at all the reaction myself, both here in the United States and especially in Europe, obviously in Kyiv as well, is that there is still an unwillingness to recognize the hardcore reality of the power dynamics between these two sides. There are no equal sides here. The cumulative West, United States, Europe, Ukraine, and then the Russian on the other side are not equal. Russia is in the unequivocal power position, so they have all the leverage. This war is already concluded in terms of who's going to win, and it's going to be the Russian side. The only question to remain is how bad the loss will be for the Ukraine side. And there are still way too many people in the West, and I'm talking at the highest levels like Macron, Keir Starmer, several others in Europe, who still want to think that they can just talk their way into getting good outcome with this in negotiations. But there are no good outcomes to get. There is no rational reason why the side that has the dominant military, economic, industrial, and diplomatic power is going to concede something it doesn't have to the weaker power and the weaker side. And so when anyone is surprised by this outcome, I scratch my head and don't understand what they were expecting coming out of this phone call. If they thought the personality of Donald Trump would be enough to get Putin to do something that works to his disadvantage, I think they were going to be surprised. As it turns out, this partial agreement for the refusal to hit the energy infrastructure actually is the one thing Putin could did that benefits his side, because Ukraine has had some recent success in the last few weeks of making some hard hits on the Russian oil infrastructure and their energy infrastructure with these massive drone attacks. Now then, that's off the table, so the benefit definitely goes to the Russian side because the war on the ground doesn't stop.
So my question is, if your analysis is correct, the West is really done in here. If your analysis is correct, the Russians have this dominant power, and you mentioned it industrially, you mentioned it militarily. What does this say for the future of Europe? What does this say for the future of the West?
Well, I'll tell you, the future of Europe is going to be fine if it finally acknowledges reality on the ground, which it has failed to do for 3 years. This war it could have never happened. It could have been avoided entirely if we had just applied the Minsk agreements, if we had applied the December 2021 offer that Putin gave, which was less good from the Western side than the Minsk agreements would, or if we had taken the first off-ramp 2 months into the war. Every time we had a chance to get this off the table and preserve the rest of Ukraine and eliminate the possibility of any kind of escalation into Europe, we forfeited that. We said, no, we want the military victory, and there's not going to be one. So our unwillingness to acknowledge ground truth reality has us in this place here now. So if we can finally learn the lessons of the failures of the past diplomatically, we can end the pressure here, because Russia repeatedly says they want to improve relations with the West. They want to get back to positive relations. That was also in the call with Donald Trump from Russia. They're not looking to conquer anything beyond what they need for their security inside Ukraine. So if we want peace, then all we have to do is get this war off the table and start to work on normalization of relations. That's the hard part. The really hard part for the West, though, is that they have to acknowledge by these actions that all these things we have done, I just pointed out for 3 years, have been a failure. And that seems to be, eating pride seems to be the worst thing and the most difficult thing for the West.
I think that's true for a lot of the leaders of Europe. Trump seems, or is, surrounded at least by advisors who I think are more cognizant of that underlying reality. Because, we can talk about everything that, and I agree with you, that was done wrong to get us to the point, but then it just becomes, where do we go forward from here? Trump, I think, is perfectly willing to, acknowledge where we are now and say that, well, Russia has the overwhelming advantage you're describing, but we hope at least Russia would rather, even though they could go further, they could do more, they could win, as you're saying, they would rather not, because they still do have to lose people on their side. Maybe they're more willing to engage in just sheer cannon fodder of their numbers, but if they're really just going to do whatever they do, regardless of any diplomacy, then then we have no incentive to really shoot for peace either. We'll just continue this, and everyone will die on both sides.
I think that is exactly right. I have absolutely and so happy that President Trump is doing what nobody else in the West had done up to this point. He said it straight up. He said that Russia has the cards here. They have the dominant position. That's why even heading into this call, he says, maybe we'll get a deal, maybe we won't, because he recognizes that issue right there. He is so focused on getting the killing stopped, as he has been from the beginning. And I give him huge credit for that, because without him, if it was just the Harris administration, we would just be on status quo and the killing would just go on until Russia wins. Russia absolutely, and they say this on their own, they would rather end this war on negotiated terms where nobody else has to die. But they say that their requirements, which Putin put in that readout of that call, or the Russians did, they say those are non-negotiable. And if we have to fight, we'll get them, but we would prefer to get them diplomatically. So here's the thing that everybody needs the West to understand. Russia is going to get all the things that Putin put in that readout. And whether they get them diplomatically or whether they get them militarily depends on whether the West, and it's not just Trump, but it's the West, acknowledges that reality. Because if we take the negotiated path, the war can end quickly and the dying will stop immediately. But if we don't, then Russia will not just take the 4 oblasts, they'll keep going. So it can get worse if we don't do what makes sense.
I think that is the case. What will it take to get through to Ukrainian leadership? Zelensky and Trump have not been on the same page at various points. They had that contentious meeting the other week, and I think things have gone better since then. What will it take in that regard?
Yeah, I honestly see no prospect that Zelensky will agree to any of these things. I've talked to some folks who have some pretty good connections on the Ukraine side in Kiev, and they view him as being irrational, and that he's not able to make rational decisions, and he won't make these statements. And you see his public statements. He may have toned down the rhetoric, but his stances on what he's trying to seek are still detached from reality. He still wants everything on his side. He wants the open possibility for NATO. He wants to have a strong military, and he wants himself to go on, and he'll have an election when he feels like it, all of which are contrary to what the Russians say they're willing to do. So I think that's going to put Trump in a position to where at some point he's going to have to say, look, I've agreed to this with Putin, and you guys want to do it or not, you're a sovereign country. But if you don't, you're going to do it without any help from us. You can figure it out from Europe. And Europe has said that they can't do it without a U.S. backstop, continue to support Ukraine. But I think it's going to take a hard call by Trump like that. He'll take a lot of heat, both domestically and internationally. But I think it's the best thing for the Ukraine people, so no more have to die.
I do not disagree with your analysis about the beginnings of this war. It should never have happened. You talked about the Minsk Accords and so forth, and I don't even disagree with your analysis of what's happening now. But I don't think that all of these European leaders, for instance, if you even leave the United States out of it, all of these European leaders are not stupid, and they have very legitimate fears. I saw that the German parliament has just okayed greatly increased defense spending and so forth. Everything that you're saying, once again, not that I disagree with the facts, but we're supposed to assume that Putin will do exactly what he says, and that's really all he wants. And he wants to get right back to better relationships with the West. What is your analysis of why so many European leaders don't believe that and feel that if they don't do everything possible to stop him now, then things will be much worse in the future?
Yeah, I think you have to take the emotion out of it and look at capacity. Does Russia have the capacity to roll to the West and to take on a 32-member alliance its nuclear power? I argue that they don't. Maybe they will in the future. The Baltics actually are at risk here. They don't need to be, but they are right now militarily, because if Russia decided to move on that direction because they can't get an agreement with the West, it's possible that they could do that, and militarily, conventionally, they can. But they can't go anywhere further, like the German, French, even Hungarians, Romanians. Russia doesn't have the capacity to roll in and take all of that stuff. I mean, they physically don't have the manpower, the trucks, the tanks, the artillery pieces, missiles. They can't have a big war like that because they don't have the capacity. But no one should trust Putin. I would never trust Putin if I was Poland, for example, or any of those countries. They're in their rights and should, even according to NATO's terminology, they should work harder on their own national defense. And if they feel a threat, then they should put it on the table. But I'll tell you, looking at the numbers, most of them don't actually believe that Russia's a threat. That's why there's still so many that are below that 2% threshold. And even the UK might go up to 2.5% in the number of years. But the money is where their truth is. And if they don't believe there's a threat from Russia, they're not going to spend that much money. If they do, then that's where they should go. Every nation should provide for its own national security and not trust Putin.
Very useful analysis. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis would have been very welcome analysis from within the administration. Nice to see you on our show again. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Robbie. I appreciate it.
Up next, Doge is going after one of America's treasures. Marianne and I will discuss, and she will get into her memo. Stay tuned.